The Dark Secrets of Vampires. Unveiling the Immortal Curse. Welcome to a world where darkness reigns. Tonight, we will delve into the mysterious tapestry of one of the most terrifying yet beloved creatures, vampires. But not just any vampires tonight. We will unravel the history, the myths that shaped them, and their transformation from bloodthirsty predators to the immortal icons that have captivated humanity for centuries. So grab the blanket, turn off the lights, and prepare for a journey that will take us from the misty hills of Eastern Europe to the bustling cities of modern America. Chapter 1. The Birth of Darkness, the Origins of Vampires. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a dense forest, shrouded in mist, somewhere in Eastern Europe. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The wind rustles through the trees, carrying with it ancient tales of creatures that stalk the night, thirsting for the blood of the living. These are not just ghosts or spirits. They are something far more terrifying. They are vampires. Long before Dracula sank his fangs into popular culture, the world was already filled with stories of creatures who drank blood to sustain their lives. The earliest whispers of vampire-like beings date back to Mesopotamia, where the Akkadian myth spoke of the Akaru, female demons who drank the blood of infants. In ancient Greece, there was Empusa, a shape-shifting creature who seduced men and then devoured them. But it was in Eastern Europe, particularly in Romania and the Balkans, where the legend of the vampire took its most recognizable form. The Romanian folklore of the Strigoi, undead spirits rising from their graves to feed on the living, became the foundation of what we know today as the vampire myth. The Strigoi were not just walking corpses. They were the souls of those who died unjustly, often people who had been wronged in life or who had died under mysterious circumstances. These Strigoi were said to rise from their graves at night, sneaking into the homes of the living to drain their blood or torment their victims. In some villages, if a person was suspected of becoming a Strigoi, the locals would exhume the body, drive a wooden stake through its heart, and sprinkle garlic in the grave to prevent it from rising again. The fear of these creatures was so profound that entire rituals and customs evolved to ward them off. Garlic was hung at doorways, mirrors were covered, and certain burial rites were performed to ensure the dead stayed dead. Chapter 2. Dracula, the Rise of the Vampire King. Then came Dracula, a name that has become legendary. But who was Dracula really? The name Dracula was inspired by Vlad III, a 15th century prince of Wallachia, also known as Vlad the Impaler. He earned this grisly nickname for his favored method of execution, impaling his enemies on long wooden stakes and leaving their bodies to rot in the sun as a warning to others. Vlad was brutal, calculating, and utterly ruthless, a perfect candidate to inspire the most powerful vampire in literature. However, while Vlad the Impaler was a historical figure, the Dracula we know from our nightmares was brought to life in 1897 through the pen of Bram Stoker. Stoker's novel Dracula introduced the world to a completely new type of vampire. He wasn't just a risen corpse. Dracula was a charming, intelligent nobleman who could move through high society unnoticed. But behind that polished exterior lurked a predator, driven by an insatiable thirst for blood and a desire for domination. Dracula wasn't just a horror story. It was a tale of the clash between the old world and the new, of superstition versus science, and of the dangers of unchecked power. In many ways, Dracula became a symbol of the fears that plagued the Victorian mind, fears of the unknown, of foreigners, and of unrestrained sexuality. Yet, despite being a creature of pure evil, Dracula was also strangely alluring. He represented the ultimate rebel, immortal, powerful, and completely free from society's constraints. He could shapeshift, control the minds of others, and live forever. What could be more tempting than that? But with immortality comes a terrible price. And it is this duality, the seduction and the horror, that has kept the vampire myth alive for centuries. Chapter 3. The Eternal Hunger, Blood, and Immortality. one of the most defining characteristics of vampires, aside from their immortality, is their insatiable hunger for blood. But why is blood so essential to their existence? Blood has long been a powerful symbol in human culture. It represents life, vitality, and strength. In many ancient rituals, blood was offered as a sacrifice to gods and spirits, believed to contain the very essence of life itself. For vampires, blood isn't just food, it is the source of their immortality. Without it, they wither and decay, losing their youth and power. This necessity turns vampires into predators, unlike the monsters of other myths, who might feast on flesh or souls. Vampires must get close to their prey. They must seduce, deceive, or overpower their victims in order to feed. There's something deeply unsettling about this intimacy. The idea that someone you trust, someone who appears normal, could be the very creature draining your life away. In many stories, the act of feeding isn't just about survival for the vampire. It's also about control. By drinking someone's blood, they claim a piece of their victim's soul, binding them in a way that goes beyond mere death. Some vampires can even turn their victims into vampires, creating a new generation of the undead. This cycle between predator and prey creates an endless spiral of destruction. And in that spiral lies the true horror of the vampire myth. Vampires are not just monsters. They are a dark reflection of humanity's own desires and fears. The hunger for power, the fear of death, and the allure of immortality all converge in the figure of the vampire. Chapter 4. The Curse of Immortality, Weaknesses and Lost Powers. Although vampires possess immense power, they are far from invincible. In fact, what makes them so terrifying is also what reveals their greatest weaknesses. Sunlight. In many modern tales, sunlight is fatal to vampires. When exposed to sunlight, their skin burns, blisters, and quickly turns to ash. This weakness reminds us that, while powerful in the darkness, vampires are still bound by the natural laws of the living world. The sun, a symbol of life and vitality, becomes the ultimate enemy for these creatures of the night. Garlic. One of the most popular methods of warding off vampires is garlic. Its pungent odor is believed to repel vampires, likely due to its association with purity and health. In some cultures, garlic was even used in burial rituals to prevent the dead from rising. Religious symbols, crosses, holy water, and other religious symbols are often considered weapons against vampires. The connection between vampires and divinity reinforces the idea that they are damned souls, beings who have rejected the natural order of life and death, and thus are vulnerable to divine punishment. Wooden stakes through the heart. One of the most famous ways to kill a vampire is by driving a wooden stake through their heart. The symbolism of this act is powerful. The heart, the source of life, is where the vampire's curse is most concentrated. By driving a stake through it, the vampire's unnatural existence is ended. Mirrors and reflections. In some stories, vampires have no reflection in mirrors because they are soulless beings. The mirror, a tool of self-reflection, reveals nothing when facing a creature that has lost its humanity. However, even with all these weaknesses, vampires remain one of the most resilient creatures in folklore. Their ability to hide among crowds, blending in right before our eyes, is what makes them truly dangerous. You could be sitting next to a vampire in a cafe, passing them on the street, or even living next door, and you wouldn't know until it's too late. Chapter 5. The Evolution of Vampires, From Horror to Seduction. Vampires have traveled a long road from the decaying corpses of Eastern European lore to the complex, even human-like figures of modern times. In the 20th century, vampires were still seen as monstrous creatures. Films like Nosferatu, 1922, portrayed them as grotesque, rat-like beings, crawling out of their graves to spread disease and death. But as society evolved, so did the vampire myth. By the mid-20th century, vampires became more romanticized. Within Rice's Interview with the Vampire, 1976. Vampires were no longer soulless monsters, but tortured souls struggling with their immortality. Lewis, the main character, grapples with guilt over needing to kill to survive, while Stat fully embraces his vampiric nature. This internal conflict made vampires more relatable. They became tragic figures, immortal beings who had everything, yet nothing. They could live forever, but could never truly live. This shift in the vampire narrative reflected broader cultural changes, as society became more interested in the psychological and emotional depth of monsters. In the 21st century, vampires became even more humanized. In series like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries, vampires were no longer just bloodthirsty predators, but beings capable of love, sacrifice, and even coexistence with humans. Chapter 6: The Allure of Vampires, a psychological analysis. So, why are vampires so captivating to us? What is it about them that keeps us hooked, even after centuries? Whether it's in horror, romance, or mystery, the answer lies in the deep psychological attraction we have to the vampire archetype. Immortality. At the core of the vampire myth is the concept of immortality, a universal human desire. The fear of death haunts all of us, and vampires represent an escape from that inevitability. However, as many vampire stories show, immortality comes with a steep price. Vampires are doomed to watch the world change while they remain the same, losing everyone they love and everything they once knew. This existential loneliness underscores the vampire's allure. The desire for eternal life clashing with the realization that such a life may bring unbearable consequences. Seduction and power. Vampires, especially in modern stories, are often portrayed as irresistibly seductive beings. Their ability to control and manipulate their victims taps into deep desires for power and dominance. Vampires don't just feed on blood. They often possess supernatural allure, mesmerizing and bending others to their will. This power dynamic is both terrifying and tempting, making vampires an embodiment of humanity's darkest desires. The conflict between humanity and instinct. Perhaps the most relatable aspect of vampires is their internal struggle between their human nature and their monstrous instincts. Vampires are often depicted as emotional, yearning for connection and morality, yet constantly battling the uncontrollable thirst for blood. This mirrors the human condition, the struggle between primal instincts and the desire to live by higher moral standards. Forbidden love. In many modern vampire stories, there's a recurring theme of forbidden love. Whether it's Edward and Bella in Twilight or Stefan and Elena in The Vampire Diaries, relationships between vampires and humans are fraught with complexity and danger. The idea of loving a creature or someone who could destroy you serves as a powerful metaphor for many of the struggles we face in relationships, especially those that challenge societal norms or expectations. Chapter 7: Beyond Twilight, Darker Interpretations of Vampires. While works like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries have cast vampires in a more romantic light, there's still a darker side to modern vampire tales, exploring the horror and existential fear associated with these creatures. In films like Let the Right One in 2008, vampires are portrayed in a more primal, raw way. The movie follows Oscar, a lonely boy, and his strange friendship with Eli, a mysterious vampire child. Eli is not a romanticized vampire. She is cold, violent, and trapped in an eternal cycle of survival. Their relationship is fraught with contradictions, as Eli's bloodthirst contrasts with Oscar's innocence. This story strips away the glamour of immortality, focusing instead on the bleak, isolated existence of a creature doomed to live forever. Another darker interpretation of the vampire myth can be found in Only Lovers Left Alive, 2013, by director Jim Jarmusch. The film follows Adam and Eve, two ancient vampires who have lived through the rise and fall of civilizations. Unlike violent, bloodthirsty vampires, Adam and Eve are introspective, intellectual figures. They've witnessed the highs and lows of human history and now find themselves disillusioned with the modern world. The film explores the psychological toll of immortality, emphasizing the deep boredom and melancholy that comes with eternal life in a world that no longer excites them. In these darker interpretations, vampires are creatures who have lost their humanity, not because they drink blood, but because they have outlived their connection to the living world. Immortality becomes a curse rather than a gift, and what makes them powerful also condemns them to eternal despair. Chapter 8: Vampires in Global Folklore, a Worldwide Perspective. While we often think of vampires in the context of Eastern European mythology or modern Western stories, the idea of blood drinking, nocturnal creatures exists in many cultures around the world. The vampire myth is universal, though it takes on different forms depending on where you look. Aswang, Philippines and Filipino folklore. The aswang is a shape-shifting monster that preys on humans, often drinking blood or eating unborn children. The aswang is not limited to one form. It can transform into animals or even people. Unlike traditional vampires, often associated with death and the afterlife, the aswang is a living creature, though it shares the same thirst for human life force. Jiangshi, China in Chinese folklore. The Jiangshi, or hopping vampire, is a reanimated corpse that sucks the life force, or qi, from the living. These creatures are stiff and are often depicted hopping as they seek out victims. The Jiangshi's hunger for qi offers a unique twist on the vampire legend, and they are believed to be created when a soul cannot leave its body after death, turning the corpse into a soulless but deadly vessel. Strigoi, Romania as mentioned earlier. There are different types of strigoi in Romanian folklore. Some are spirits of the dead that rise to haunt the living, while others are living people with supernatural abilities, such as shape-shifting or invisibility. Both types of strigoi share one thing in common: a desire to drain the life force from the living. Much like the vampires of modern fiction, these global interpretations of the vampire myth share common themes of death, immortality, and the consumption of life. Whether it's blood, energy, or qi, these creatures prey on the living to sustain their cursed existence, embodying the fear of death and the unknown. Chapter 9: The Enduring Appeal. Why do vampires continue to captivate us? So, why do vampires continue to fascinate us after centuries of storytelling? In a world where myths and legends come and go, what makes vampires so timeless? Part of the answer lies in the adaptability of the vampire. Vampires are shapeshifters, not just literally, but in how they can be molded to reflect the fears, desires, and anxieties of different eras and cultures. In the Victorian era, Dracula symbolized fears of foreign invaders and unchecked sexuality. In modern times, vampires like Edward Cullen, Orlstat de Lioncourt reflect complex emotions about power, love, and morality. Vampires are a perfect metaphor for the human condition. They represent our fear of death, our desire for immortality, and the struggle between primal instincts and noble aspirations. They are both monsters and tragic figures, doomed to live forever, but forever haunted by the consequences of their existence. Perhaps most importantly, vampires allow us to explore these themes in a thrilling, terrifying way. Whether they seduce us with their charm or horrify us with their bloodlust, vampires will always hold a special place in our collective imagination. They live in the shadows, but they reflect the deepest parts of ourselves, the parts we may fear to confront but can't look away from. Conclusion: the legacy of vampires. From the misty hills of Transylvania to the bright streets of modern America, vampires have woven themselves into the fabric of our culture. They are immortal beings, but always changing, shape-shifting and evolving with each new generation of storytellers. Whether they entice us with their allure or frighten us with their bloodlust, vampires will remain an endless source of inspiration. As you close your eyes tonight, think about those immortal creatures wandering the night, searching for their next prey. Somewhere, In the dark corners of your imagination, a vampire is waiting, forever hungry, forever seductive, and always watching. Thank you for joining me in exploring the legend of vampires. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about other mysterious creatures, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Stay curious. And remember, in the world of the supernatural, nothing is ever as it seems. Good night, dear friends, and beware of the dark.